Hello guys, this is your friend Saiyan Nexus Audio Fanfic and we are back in new fanfic. What if Dragon Ball revealed Mr. Popo's lost daughter part 3? There exist such days in one's life that seem to be the pinnacle of suffering. When every single event manages, in some way, either to cause physical and or emotional pain or just act as a deterrence to any sort of thought that could raise one's spirits in any way, shape, or form. When even the universe itself seems to spite you and the drudgery of the day seeks to poison your soul and kill you from the inside out. Puddin was having just such a day. Bling. Oh my god, groaned Puddin, dragging both her hands down her face. Bling. All the Kais, gods, and Kamis in the universe, please make them stop, she pleaded. Bling. AAARRRRGGGGGHHHH. She screamed out in frustration. The exclamation of pain was enough to momentarily throw her off her flight path. A bit of green flashed past her, revealing her error, and she maneuvered herself back on course. Zap. You missed another one, Puddin, came the sound of an annoyed Elder Kai. Puddin groaned and pushed a button on her scouter. Sorry about that, Elder Kai, she said. Got distracted. Bling. Well, you had better keep focused, recruit, or you'll have to start all over again. Bling. Please make this stop, Elder Kai, pleaded Puddin, feeling each bling reverberate in her very soul. I have been doing this for 3 hours. I need it to stop. Please, I am actually begging you here. Bling. In this moment, Puddin couldn't think of a more mind-numbing experience she had had in all of her years of life. As part of her remedial training, Elder Kai had thought it would be a grand idea to make sure Puddin was properly trained on all of her basics because he apparently didn't trust her with anything at all. So she had to display her understanding of basic flight capabilities to him. Bling. This had consisted of teleporting to a huge mountain range and flying through rings. Hundreds and hundreds of rings. And each of these rings played an annoying electronic chime as soon as she passed through them. And all of these chimes seemed to take up permanent residence in her brain. All she could hear were blings. Bling. Can we please move on to something else? Puddin pleaded. Sparring. Key blasts. Even just push-ups. I will do literally anything if you'll just let me stop this exercise. Bling. Puddin heard a grunt on the other end of her scouter. Fine, said Elder Kai. We can stop the flight exercise for the day. Oh my god, thank you, Puddin said with a deep sigh. She stopped herself in midair and curled herself into a ball. She let out a sound that was half moan and half growl as she began kneading her temples. Come back to me quickly, said Elder Kai. I'll get a time gate set up and we can move on to another training exercise. Then the communication channel clicked off. It's okay, Puddin whispered to herself. It's okay, Puddin. Just a little more remedial training. You can do this. Once you get through this, you'll be back on missions and you can get your life back on track. After blowing out another breath, Puddin turned herself in the air and flew in the direction of where Elder Kai had been relaxing while she was enduring this torture. I've got this, Puddin said with a smile. I want to die, Puddin moaned, her face buried in her hands. You haven't even started yet, snapped Elder Kai. Why is this part of training? She demanded, arms wildly gesticulating in the direction of two motionless figures before her. One was of the hero Son Goku while the other was of the wicked Goku Black. Both of them were standing on the grass and T-posing, of all things. What's going on? Why are they standing like that? These are Echo Fighters, said Elder Kai, clasping his hands together and giving Puddin an annoyed expression. We use them for advanced training and special team exercises. They can copy someone's personality in a specific time, but have an adjustable power level to make things more interesting. As for why they are here, they will be integral to your next exercise. As a time patroller, you will have to work alongside numerous individuals across history, both heroic and villainous. You may also have to work with individuals who have diverging goals. Your job for this session will be to defeat incoming enemies while at the same time convincing these two to fight alongside you instead of against each other. Puddin's mouth had dropped open halfway through the description. When Elder Kai stopped talking, there were a few moments of silence before Puddin shook herself out of her stupor. This is insane, she said. Hey, laughed Elder Kai. Probably. Better get to it, recruit. He plopped himself down on a rock and pulled a TV remote out of his pocket before hitting a button on it. The two Echo fighters shuddered for a moment before their eyes snapped open and their posture became more natural. Hi, the Goku drone said excitedly. My name's Goku. What's yours? Puddin stared at the not Goku for a few moments before she groaned and massaged her forehead. My name is Puddin, she said. Nice to meet you, I guess. She turned to Goku Black and gave him a nod. Sup Linkin Park. How's it going? Goku Black's face contorted in anger. You will kneel before me, mortal trash. He snarled. Sure, I'll get right on that, Puddin said flatly. Goku gasped and dramatically pointed a finger at Goku Black's face. It's evil me. And not the regular evil me. He gasped again. A brand new evil me. Shut up, simpleton, snapped Goku Black. I am a god. If you dare cross me, I shall annihilate you, just as I have done with countless planets. Well, that's actually not too impressive, said Goku, now scratching his cheek. I mean, we can all destroy planets pretty easily. Hard to believe we can fight on them so easily, actually. But here's something I gotta ask. He crossed his arms and looked curious. Have you ever beaten a freezer before? Grr, growled Goku Black. You may have beaten a planet, but I don't think you've beaten a freezer. I did. Oh, have you beaten a Cell or a Boo before? Those are really hard to fight. Heck, I've never beaten a Cell before. I had my son do that for me. I've had enough of your ramblings. Goku Black snapped before lunging toward Goku with the intent of ripping him limb from limb. However, he didn't make it close enough. Puddin had placed herself between the identical pair and grabbed them by their ridiculous hairdos. Just as the pair of them were about to protest, she yanked hard on her two captives. There was a reverberating crack as two Saiyan skulls slammed into each other at high speed. Both Echo fighters let out cries of pain and held their reddening foreheads. Puddin glared at the both of them and crossed her arms, ignoring the sound of Elder Kai chuckling in the background. Listen up, dumb dums, she said, baring her needle-sharp teeth. I don't care about anything you might have going on. Until I say otherwise, the both of you are working for me. If you don't do what I say or if you start fighting each other, I'll suplex you right into the ground. Are we clear? I'm okay with that as long as we get to spar at the end, said Goku, giving Puddin an innocent, or brainless, smile. Goku Black only made a few grumbling noises, but Puddin decided to take that as both an agreement and an apology to a superior power. Good to hear, she said with a nod. Now both of you follow me. She lifted off from the ground and took to the sky with the two Gokus trailing behind her. Much like the exercise before it, this one was taking place in one of Chronoa's time arenas. They were particular locations that were saved and stored in and around Conton City. Time patrollers could hop in and out of them whenever they wanted to spar, hang out, or do training exercises. This exercise was in an archipelago of islands, each with green grass, rocky hills, and swaying palm trees. It was a good open area for a battle, and Puddin was sure she was about to get one. Your approach was about as subtle as a rhino in a tea shop, came Elder Kai's voice in Puddin's scouter, but it was effective for this early exercise. Future situations are just going to get harder, you know. Then I'll deal with them as they come, said Puddin. What's the mission? Well, in this next exercise you'll be, Elder Kai let out a long curious hum that was so theatrical it had to have been planned. It seems that there is an extra person here. Oh no, he seems to be hurt. Whatever shall we do? He said dramatically. Puddin rolled her eyes, imagining Elder Kai swooning to complete such a performance. You must aid him at once, recruit. Yes, Elder Kai, she droned, tapping a button on her scouter. After a few beeps from the little machine, the HUD lit up to point in the direction of the unrecognized power level. On one of the smaller islands below her, Puddin could make out a humanoid figure collapsed on the beach. With a sigh, she allowed gravity to begin reasserting its hold on her. It might get annoying to keep saving these weaklings when she could take care of any issues by herself, but it was still a part of her job. Plus, Elder Kai likely wouldn't allow her mission to progress until she healed this guy. When she had almost touched down on the sandy beach, she groaned as she finally got a good look at who she was reviving. It was Krillin, likely another Echo fighter. The short bald man was flat on his back and only giving occasional twitches to show he was still alive. Irritation flicked across her face before she gave an exaggerated gasp and put her hands on her cheeks. Oh no, she said flatly. Krillin's been killed. It could have been literally anyone. Cut the sass, recruit, said Elder Kai. He's a resident of this age and you need to assist him in the fight to come, not least of which involves making sure he doesn't die. Now get to it. Yes sir, mumbled Puddin. Should I use my emergency senzu? Of course not, snapped Elder Kai. You have to save that for a situation where you need it. Just, give him a zap from the rejuvenator. Yes sir, Puddin said again, reaching into her utility belt and pulling out a device about the size and shape of a dragon radar. Instead of a radar screen, however, it had a crystalline focusing lens. Puddin held the device out with the lens facing Krillin's crumpled form and pressed a button on the side. After a short charge-up whine, a beam of yellow energy shot out from the device to connect with Krillin, causing him to glow with energy. Suddenly, Krillin exploded into a blur of motion, going through the positions of fighting, being hit, and collapsing, but in reverse order. In a few moments, Krillin stood on the sand with his back to Puddin, slightly bruised but conscious. He groaned as he massaged his head and looked around blearily. This device had been created by Puddin's mother a few years before she went away. When time patrollers needed to give someone a quick heal and there were no available senzu beans, a blast from the rejuvenator would rewind the warrior's body to a point where they had more energy and fewer injuries. It wasn't as effective as a full heal, but it was normally good enough to get them back in the fight. Krillin rubbed at his eyes again before turning in Puddin's direction. He froze and blinked rapidly. Colors, he said quietly before his gaze seemed to sharpen a bit. Wow, if I knew there were angels as pretty as you, I think I would have died a lot sooner. Said Puddin, taking a step back. And now she had to deal with this. Hey Krillin, Goku said excitedly as he landed next to the short man. You doing okay? If you are, I'd be happy to kill you again, said Goku Black, who also landed near the Earthling. It would be a favor to the world and to yourself. Oh hey Goku, said Krillin. Man, I really must have took a knock to the head. 'Cause there's two of you. And one of you looks really, really angry. You dare think I'm the same as this Saiyan trash? Roared Goku Black. Arg, I'll happily destroy every single atom of your pathetic form for such an insult. Sorry, Dark me, but I won't just stand here and let you beat up my friend, said Goku, moving himself between Goku Black and Krillin. Oh, that's right, I forgot, said Goku Black, now sporting a snake-like smile. You only do that when your son is the one fighting, don't you? Okay, now I'm definitely going to deck me in the schnoz. Responded Goku, putting up his fists. Come at me, mortal. If you think you even can. Roared Goku Black. Puddin rolled her eyes before stretching her arms toward them and yanking on their ears. Both of the ferocious fighters immediately started crying in pain as their heads were forced to follow where she dragged them. This is your second warning, she said, glaring at the both of them. I want you two to knock it off and do what I say. If I have to remind you a third time, I'm going to be very pissed. Got it. Got it, they both said. She nodded and released the two identical idiots, letting them rub at their abused ears. Wow, said Krillin, staring at Puddin with wonder. Puddin just turned away and pressed a button on her scouter. So, what's the next exercise, Elder Kai? She asked. Well, I think your opponents should be arriving any second now, recruit. A series of notifications suddenly pinged on Puddin's scouter, informing her that a large group of new signals had appeared. As the signals drew in closer, Puddin's jaw dropped yet again. You have seriously got to be shitting me, she muttered. It was Saibaman, of all things. A veritable army of shrunken green gremlins landed all around Puddin and her drones, all of them chattering and shrieking like demonic monkeys. They gazed at the four of them with burning red eyes that held nothing except for malice. Why the hell do you have me fighting Saibaman? Puddin shouted into her scouter. These are garbage enemies. We use them to train kids. Says the girl who's not even 2 years old, sassed Elder Kai. You know what I mean. Puddin snapped. Saibaman are so not worth my time. Behind her, a particularly brave Saibaman leapt at her from the top of a boulder, its claws extended and its teeth bared. It came closer and closer to her unprotected back, thinking of nothing more than sinking its fangs into her throat. Before it could, though, Puddin moved. She gave barely a quarter turn toward her left shoulder and there was a faint pop as she brought her fist up. It was the sound of millions of air molecules desperately trying to get out of the way. The back of her hand made brief contact with the side of the Saibaman's skull, transferring an amount of kinetic force that was usually measured in megatons. The opposite half of the creature's head exploded outward while its red eyes burst in their sockets. The force reached the rest of the Saibaman's body a split second later, almost bending the creature over double at the spine. Its corpse flopped to the sand below, where the innocent waves lapped at it and carried away its alien green blood. See, said Puddin, not even pausing her conversation. Garbage. Enemy. Give me something to fight that might actually help me improve. Saibaman are the traditional practice enemy for such training exercises, explained Elder Kai, sounding thoroughly unintimidated. That goes for both basic training and remedial training. Unless you want to be on probation for the rest of eternity, you'd best get to it. With that, the scouter clicked off. Puddin stood there silently staring into the far distance before she gave a loud groan. I swear I will find a way to kill that geezer, she muttered. She looked at the 3 Echo fighters and jerked her head toward the Saibaman horde. Well, what are you waiting for? Have at 'em. The Saibaman took that statement as their own signal to attack, all of them letting out a collective shriek and lunging at the 4 warriors. Goku, Goku Black, and Krillin all rushed to meet their opponents, with Krillin only giving a few whimpers of worry. Puddin focused on the Saibaman closest to her and set about her own chore. Punch, squish, kick, squish, scratch, squish, 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 squish. Eventually, Puddin's thoughts became utterly lost in a haze of absolute boredom. Her movements were thoughtless, mechanical. She merely needed to tap these little monsters to destroy them. With such little engagement in her outside world, Puddin's thoughts turned inward. Why is this even happening to me? I studied hard. I trained harder. Did they really need to start me from square one? To treat me like some useless kid? As she used her thumb and forefinger to snap a Saibaman's neck, she sighed. I won't mess up again if they give me another chance. I'm super powerful. I can handle anything they throw at me. I just wish that would give me some training that wasn't so stupid. Hey, Rainbow Angel, Krillin said, looking over his shoulder at her. You're doing really great. If I live through this, wanna go get some coffee afterwards? Or maybe some fro-yo? No fair, Krillin, whined Goku, blasting a group of Saibaman with a Kamehameha. I wanted to spar with her after this was done. She seems really strong. Silence. Both of you, roared Goku Black, who was currently carpet bombing every Saibaman he could see. Having to lower myself to fighting such insects is already an embarrassment, but listening to you filthy mortals prattle on and on is too much to bear. Come on, evil me. Don't be like that. If you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything. I'll make certain that you never again say anything if you speak up again. Snapped Black. I don't care what the Gray One says. The Gray One can hear you, asshole, Puddin called out as she idly ripped a Saibaman in half and used the bottom half to club a second one over the head. Don't you talk about her like that, yelled Krillin, shaking his fist at the dark mirror of his friend. If you don't knock it off, I'm gonna. Suddenly, Goku Black stood right in front of Krillin, a sickening sneer on his face as he looked down his nose at the short earthling. You're going to what, mortal? He asked. Whimpered Krillin, beginning to tremble. Puddin groaned before moving behind Goku Black and wrapping her arms around his midsection. The Mad Kai didn't even have a chance to voice his displeasure at this before Puddin hauled him back, suplexing him headfirst into the sandy beach. Goku Black was buried up to his waist, his feet kicking uselessly in the air as he tried to comprehend what had just happened. Puddin released him and stood up, dusting the sand off her pants. A quick look around told her that there were no more Saibaman attacking them. The horde of monsters had been reduced to bits and pieces, turning the sands and surrounding waters a sickly green. Goku and Krillin were both looking from her to the kicking legs of Goku Black. She shrugged at them before walking away from the planted Kai. I did warn him, she explained. Man, I wanna learn how to do that, Goku said with a smile. Oh god, she can suplex me anytime she likes, Krillin murmured. There was a trickle of blood running from his nose that Puddin was quite certain had nothing to do with the fight. Are we finally done? Puddin asked no one in particular, pressing a button on her scouter. After a moment, an update appeared on the eyepiece, making her groan. Looks like we missed one, she said. My scouter is telling me it should be right around. A final Saibaman suddenly burst from the sand right in front of Puddin and lunged forward, locking its arms and legs around her torso. It gave a chittering laugh as it dug its nails into Puddin's outfit before it closed its eyes. Kaboom! The Saibaman exploded with incredible force, fully engulfing Puddin in a fireball of destruction. Sand was blasted everywhere and both Krillin and Goku covered their eyes against the blinding light and flying debris. When the explosion ended, there was a flaming crater and billowing smoke left in the place where Puddin had been standing. Rainbow Angel! No! Screamed Krillin, reaching out desperately to where she had just been. Oh my gosh! She's been Yamcha'd! Goku cried out in surprise. Too soon, Goku. When the smoke cleared, however, their jaws dropped. Puddin stood exactly as she had been before, the only change being a few more smudges on her face and the disappearance of her scouter. She sighed in annoyance before idly noticing her arm was on fire. I hate this training, she snarled, slapping at the fire until it died out. It's a complete waste of my time. Even when these guys pull out their strongest attack, I can't feel a thing. Please be my wife, Krillin blurted out. Puddin glared at the small man. If keeping him alive wasn't part of her mission. All she said was, not happening. She really tried to keep the snarl out of her voice. Ah, moaned Krillin as he seemed to deflate on the spot. Puddin looked away and muttered under her breath, God, could this day get any more annoying? She reached for her belt to activate her backup communicator but stopped when she saw her belt was a burned and melted ruin. Any further complaints against the universe were interrupted when another explosion from behind her shook the beach. Goku Black, looking absolutely livid, was standing in a crater of molten sand that was rapidly cooling into glass. That is my absolute limit. He roared. I have had to put up with this indignity for far too long. Everyone is dying. Man, he seems real upset, said Goku. I bet you he got some sand in his pants. It's honestly the worst. Silence, you insect, continued Goku Black. You are all mere maggots whilst I am a god. You mortals disrespect the universe while the other Kais just let you run around like destructive children. It drives me to retch. Now we have to listen to this. Puddin said through gritted teeth. Man, I really should have hit him harder. And you think you're any better? Yelled Goku Black, focusing his angered gaze on her. All this time, you've done nothing but whinge about the unfairness of the universe. His voice suddenly took on a mocking high pitch. Oh, woe is me. I don't deserve this. These enemies are too weak to have my attention. I'm better than this. He gave her a dark scowl. I do have to wonder. If you are as capable and skilled as you claim, then why do your masters see fit to only let you have scraps? His scowl morphed into a smug smile. You talk a hefty game and love throwing your weight around, but it seems that you choke on anything bigger than table scraps. Such a pathetic little house cat. Puddin's pupils constricted to tiny slivers as she glared at Goku Black. And you, he continued, turning to Goku, I honestly can't believe that. He looked like he was about to go even longer, but Puddin decided to curtail his rant with a punch to the face. After that, the only noises he made then were whimpers and moans about his newly broken nose. The sound of his suffering did nothing but piss Puddin off even more. I have had it with today. Puddin yelled with frustration. First I'm subjected to hours of flying through rings and then I have to deal with this bullshit. Said Goku, lifting a finger. Shut up, Shutup, shouted Puddin. She snarled and pointed a deadly finger at the Saiyan. You're an idiot. She pointed at Goku Black. You're a bitch. She pointed at Krillin. And you're annoying. Grr. This entire exercise has been a waste of my time. Remedial training, my ass. Everyone's just trying to annoy me to death. All three of the Echo fighters looked surprised at such an outburst. Goku Black had even stopped whining about his nose. Said Krillin. Are you feeling okay? No, I'm not, roared Puddin, glaring at the small man. I have worked my whole life to be just like my dad. I am a badass time patroller. I am an unbeatable fighter. I was made to crush my enemies and see them driven before me. This is the kind of work I was born to do. So, why did I have to go and mess up my first mission like everything else in my life? Puddin stood there for a time, panting after such an outburst, before her gaze dropped to the sand beneath her. Like everything else in my life, she repeated in a whimper before tears began falling down her face. She sunk down to sit in the crater and pulled her knees up to her chin, sniffling through her tears. Why couldn't I just do the mission? She asked. Why do I ruin everything around me? She squeezed her eyes tight and pressed her face into her knees. I wish my dad was here. She sat there for half a minute as she cried, ignoring Goku's and Goku Black's uncomfortable fidgeting. Krillin looked like he was about to try giving her an ill-advised hug when he stopped and looked up. Hey, Rainbow Angel. Puddin looked up at him and wiped away her tears. What? She snapped harshly. Can't you see I'm having a moment here? We, got company, Krillin answered, pointing above them. A time gate was ominously hanging in the air, crackling with blue energy as it spun. A few moments later, 3 humanoid figures came through it and hovered in the air. Of course another ambush happens now, Puddin said grimly, standing up. She took a few calming breaths before getting into a fighting stance. Let's try and finish this quickly. With the 3 Echo fighters behind her, Puddin charged. It wasn't an ambush. Sitting in Chronoa's office was a very surreal experience, mostly because it could barely be considered an office. The terms, room-sized scrapyard, came to mind when one considered the workspace of the Supreme Kai of Time. Every surface, both flat and otherwise, was piled with various gizmos and knick-knacks from thousands of planets across thousands of time periods. Even the floor was absolute minefield of garbage, with only narrow paths carved through the debris so individuals could make their way to the chairs or the desk. Kronoa was known to have a bit of a hoarding problem, falling in love with some sort of historical device and taking it home with her to make use of or fix into working condition. Inevitably, however, she would grow bored with it after a few hours and toss it away to join the heap. This office wasn't even the worst of it. Kronoa had a literal scrapyard in the back of her house, piled high with broken down spaceships, submarines, and even a few alien Zambonis. Waiting around in such a chaotic environment was not doing well for Puddin's nerves. The girl was just barely kept her foot from tapping against the floor as she sat uncomfortably in her chair. She had been left to stew in Kronoa's office for the last 20 minutes after a few clipped words from the childlike god. Kronoa had said she needed to confer with Elder Kai before deciding what to do about what happened during the training session. Puddin's fingers were clenched hard, grabbing fistfuls of the fabric of her pants. This was it. They were for sure about to expel her completely. She had managed to mess up again while in the middle of remedial training. There wasn't any lower position that she could possibly go to. A lifetime of dreaming and training was about to go down the drain. What was she going to tell her dad? Oh my gods, Dad, she said to herself, feeling sick. Dumplin had been on a long-term assignment for the past week and a half. He had left before she received her results of the Time Patroller exam, but had had enough time to commission this suit for her to celebrate her advancement. Now he was going to come home only to learn that she had managed to fail out of the Time Patrollers completely. She would be nothing but a failure. She felt like bile was crawling up her throat. She really was going to be sick. Before she could grab the nearest trash can-looking decoration, however, the door to the office opened. Puddin jumped in her seat and spun around. Kronoa and Elder Kai both walked inside with Elder Kai closing the door behind him. Puddin snapped to her feet, almost knocking over what looked like an alien milkshake maker, and bowed to them. She swallowed hard. She would make it through this conversation. She would not throw up, no matter how hard her body wanted to. Krona took a seat at her desk and motioned Puddin to sit down. Elder Kai clasped his arms behind his back and stood flanking Kronoa. The childlike Kai tapped her fingertips together in silence for a moment before fixing a neutral look on Puddin. I want to start this conversation with the simple statement you need to hear, Puddin. You are not being expelled from the Time Patrollers. Puddin was stunned. She had been so expecting to hear her dismissal that hearing the opposite actually made her heart skip a beat. Really? She stuttered. But I attacked those Time Patrollers. And I was already on probation. How? How? I think there are enough unusual conditions to consider this to be extenuating circumstances, said Kronoa, crossing her arms on the desk. The 3 Time Patrollers did not properly fill out the request forms to use that time arena. You had no way of knowing they were not part of the training exercise and, having lost your means of communication, you had no way of getting any confirmation from the old man. Elder Kai glowered at Kronoa, but said nothing. Furthermore, Kronoa said with a smile, I can't help but be impressed that a new recruit such as yourself was able to handedly put 3 second-year Time Patrollers into the hospital. You have the makings of a truly great Time Patroller and I won't allow that to be squandered. Puddin let out a long breath and felt as if she could melt out of relief right then and there. She wasn't being failed out. She still had a chance to be a Time Patroller. Now, normally I'd put you back on remedial training, but a new situation has come up, said Kronoa. Puddin snapped up straight in her chair. What's going on? She asked. Over the course of the day, Elder Kai began to explain, we've seen a huge uptick in time warps throughout history. So much so that every available Time Patroller has been sent out on assignment. And I do mean every Time Patroller. Things had been holding pretty constant, Kronoa continued, but then we got a new time warp. She reached behind her back and pulled out a time scroll, radiating with dark purple mist. Puddin leaned forward as Kronoa rolled out the scroll. The surface of the scroll showed the battle between the Z fighters and the invading Saiyans. Even considering canon events, things seemed to be going especially poorly for the heroes. Not the least of which being that both Vegeta and Nappa had taken their great ape forms. That looks horrible, said Puddin before meeting Kronoa's eyes. Who are you going to send? Instead of answering, Kronoa rolled up the time scroll and held it out to Puddin. She felt a thrill of excitement in her chest but stamped it down a moment later. Me. But I'm still on probation, she protested. This is not how I would handle things normally, said Kronoa, but unless we want to gather the Dragon Balls and wish for a whole new crop of fighters, you are literally our last hope. Since you are still on probation, however, Elder Kai added, I will be coming along to supervise and grade your performance. If you show good judgment and competent skill on a series of missions, you will be taken off of probation. Understood, recruit. Puddin felt like crying, finally being able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. She swallowed any tears, however, and nodded to the two gods. Understood, she said, taking the offered time scroll. Make sure you get replacement equipment before you leave, said Kronoa. Puddin nodded and stood to make for the door. Just as she was reaching for the handle, she heard a call of, Puddin, from behind her. This is your second chance, said Kronoa. Don't waste it, patroller. Puddin drew herself up straight and bowed to Kronoa. I promise I'll accomplish my mission, ma'am. You can count on it. With that, Puddin left the office, time scroll in hand and Elder Kai close behind. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Puddin had a determined smile on her face. It was time to get things back on track. The air was tense at the battleground. The Z warriors held firm, keeping in their fighting stances as the two Saiyans before them stood completely at ease. The wind blew over the rocky wasteland they stood in, kicking up tiny dust storms as it went. Prince Vegeta smiled cruelly, his eyes glinting like obsidian daggers. Next to him, Nappa had a happy, somewhat oblivious grin on his face. His eyes were darting back and forth between the gathered warriors as if trying to decide which of them he wanted to play with first. The Z warriors trembled, feeling the sheer overwhelming power of the two alien conquerors before them. They were like wolves looming over an errant flock of sheep, ready to turn them into a violent, bloody meal. All that the defenders of Earth could do was stand their ground and try to hold out long enough for Goku to arrive. If that didn't work, there was little hope for them. And by extension, the entire world. Frieza's iced. This is taking forever. From behind a giant rock pillar over 100 yards away, Puddin looked from the posing warriors to the watch on her wrist. To make sure the timeline resolved itself to the most optimal outcome, she had to wait for a bit more time until she could intervene, but this was starting to get ridiculous. She knew how the battles of Universe 7 went. She had studied them to a great extent while she was at the academy. But that still hadn't quite prepared her for just how tedious this wait was becoming. You must learn some patience if you want to move forward with being a time patroller, recruit. Puddin sighed and glowered at the ground. She had put a great deal of mental effort into making herself forget that she had a chaperone for this mission, but all that effort had just come crumbling down at Elder Kai's words. Why do we need patience? She asked, looking back at the warriors. We're time travelers, Elder Kai. We don't need patience. Why not just go 3 minutes in the future to when they actually decide to do something? She looked back over her shoulder and opened her mouth to continue, but her next question died on her lips as she stared at her minder. What's the problem, recruit? Elder Kai asked. He stood a few feet away from her with his hands clasped behind his back. Puddin blinked a few times before she finally remembered how to speak. Wah! What's with the glasses, Elder Kai? These, said Elder Kai, lifting a hand to adjust the pair of mustache glasses he wore. I meet these guys a few years from now. I don't want to take any risks that they might recognize me further down the line. Being in the time patrol is about being careful, you see. But the timeline fixes itself if we do this right, said Puddin'. What's the point if no one will remember us anyway? And who are you going to believe? Elder Kai huffed, putting his hands on his hips and looking offended. Some boring old lesson or a god who has lived for millions of years? Well, Puddin' said, scratching her head. Considering you spent the last 75 million years stuck in a sword, I wouldn't exactly call you an authority on stuff like this, old man. You take that back. Elder Kai snapped. I'm a highly respected Kai of this universe. I don't have to put up with such insults from a child. Puddin' would have been more than happy to continue this conversation with Elder Kai, but her thoughts were interrupted by a huge explosion. Puddin' blinked in surprise and peeked around the rock again. The Z warriors were mostly still where they had been before, but now Yamcha was curled up dead in a crater. Naya. That's my cue, she said excitedly. She jumped out from behind cover just as Nappa made his move, lunging forward ready to bring down a lethal blow on Krillin. Puddin' pushed off the ground so hard that the stone cracked underneath her. She flew through the air, blurring past the other Z warriors before shoving Krillin out of the way of the killing blow. Nappa stared at the shattered rock beneath his hands, confused as to where his victim had gone, before his eyes traveled up toward Puddin'. She grinned at him with her sharp teeth. Welcome to Earth, she said happily before she punched Nappa in the nose. Gah! He cried out, stumbling back and holding his face. What hit me? Vegeta blinked in dumbfounded silence for a moment. Oh God, a highlighter threw up on some crayons, the prince said. Puddin' gave him a deadpan look. I don't need fashion tips from Mr. Shoulder Pads, thank you, she responded. No matter how spiky you make them, they won't make you look any taller. How dare you insult my Royal Super Deluxe Saiyan Battle Space Armor? Vegeta roared. I'll take your head for this. Nappa. Kill her. The bald Saiyan stood back up straight and readied himself for a fight. He gave Puddin' a particularly angry glare as he powered up. You just ruined my latest nose job. I'll never forgive you for that, Rainbow Cat Lady. Bring it on. Puddin' snapped, getting ready for a fight. Does anyone have the slightest idea what's happening? Tien suddenly yelled. No, seriously guys. What the actual is going on? Puddin' turned over her shoulder to look at the man curiously. We're about to start a fight. Duh, said Nappa. I really don't think we have time for this, idiot, growled Piccolo. But where did she come from? Why is she gray and goopy? What color-blind maniac designed that costume? These are questions that I demand answers to. Puddin' stood up straight and tapped her chin contemplatively. Well, in order. I came from some demon magic, a cat, and my daddy's severed hand. I look like my daddy. And my daddy designed it with his personal color scheme. Tien blinked at her for a few moments. Your dad sounds weird. And you have 3 eyes, responded Puddin'. What's your point? Sneak attack, roared Nappa, leaping at her from behind. His fist came around in a wild haymaker with enough force to knock a person's head clean off their shoulders. Puddin' just ducked under the Saiyan's attack, the wind from it only slightly jostling her gooey ponytail. The wasteland suddenly became very, very quiet. My bad. I didn't know we were starting, said Puddin', glancing back at Nappa. Sorry if you were feeling impatient. Wow, you're fast, said Nappa, now looking at her with an excited smile. Let's see if you're faster than me. Puddin' smirked. That's what she said. Nappa blinked curiously at her. Wait, that's what who said? Who is she? Vegeta. Is someone talking about me behind my back? Vegeta was rubbing his temples with his eyes squeezed shut, looking like he was trying to teleport to a faraway land through sheer force of will. Nappa. I'm sure that there are countless millions that talk and laugh about you behind your back, but I have never cared and I'm not about to start now. Just Just get back to killing these idiots so we can find something better to do. Okay, Vegeta, Nappa said happily. I feel like squishing the baby first. In a sudden blur of motion, Nappa had sped past the Z warriors and raised his foot to stomp directly on Gohan. The only thing the little boy could do was stare open-mouthed at the hulking Saiyan looming over him. Yoink. When Nappa's foot crashed onto the ground, Gohan was gone. Wait, what? Krillin and Nappa said at the same time. Don't worry, kid, I gotcha. Puddin was standing a few yards away, holding Gohan in her arms. She smiled down at the very surprised young boy before nuzzling his cheek. Oh, you are even more adorable than I read you were. No, get off, whined the boy, trying to push her away. Stranger danger. Welp, that didn't work, Nappa said glumly before he gave a comical shrug. Oh well, I'll move on to the Pokemon. Wait, what? Shouted Xiaosu before Nappa turned to him. Mega kick, yelled Nappa, punting the doll-like fighter so hard he went flying over one of the spires of rock. Nappa grinned as he watched. It's super effective. Xiaosu. No, shouted Tien, who flew after his injured friend. What's the big idea? Piccolo demanded, whirling around to look at Puddin. Why didn't you protect him like you did Gohan? Puddin said with a shrug. He'll be fine. No, he won't, protested Gohan. If someone takes a hit with that much kinetic force behind it, it could lead to fracturing of the ribcage, causing incredible pain at best and, at worst, creating bone fragments that can puncture vital organs and near RRRDDD, yelled Piccolo, Nappa, and Vegeta all at the same time. It was actually kind of surreal. Gohan pouted while Puddin smiled and patted his head. Look on the bright side. You're still cute. Please don't patronize me, ma'am, Gohan said with a sigh. Puddin would have happily spent all day doting on tiny child Gohan, but unfortunately, there was still a fight going on. Piccolo had seized the opportunity now that Nappa was distracted to hit him with a snap kick to the back of his head. It flung the Saiyan warrior forward a few steps, but not much more than that. That wasn't very nice, said Nappa, looking over his shoulder to glare at Piccolo. Didn't your mom tell you it's rude to hit people in the back? Nope. He never had a mom, Puddin explained while Piccolo just stood there trembling. Then you have my condolences, yelled Nappa as he sent a vicious uppercut into Piccolo's gut. The Namekian was sent flying into the air, but Puddin caught him before he could go very far. She hovered there in the air, with Gohan clutched in one arm and a groaning Piccolo in the other, and glared down at Nappa. Don't you talk to me, my precious little half-Saiyan baby, or my grumpy big green baby ever again. Okay, grumbled Nappa. Wait, what about the rest of us? Asked Krillin. Tien and Xiaosu landed behind him, Xiaosu, in particular, looking a bit worse for wear. Oh right, forgot about you, said Puddin. Yeah, Nappa said with a smile as he cracked his knuckles and advanced on the other Z warriors. Let's talk. Nappa was rearing an arm back for his next attack when Puddin suddenly realized she had made an error. Krillin was one of the people who needed to survive. Piccolo wasn't. She rolled her eyes, but this was okay. She just needed to get a little more involved. She spun in the air and flung her leg out in a wide roundhouse kick. As she came around, her leg stretched out to ridiculous proportions. With a sound like a cracking whip, Puddin's extended leg wrapped tight around Nappa's wrist. Huh, said the Saiyan brute. What's wrong with your leg? Asked a frightened Gohan. Kid, I've got legs for days, said Puddin. Legs for days. Legs for days. Naya. Suddenly, Puddin spun like a tornado. Her leg pulled taut and Nappa was yanked off the ground with a scream. Puddin spun and spun and spun, smashing Nappa through boulders and rock pillars or scraping him against the ground. She heard a shout of protest come through her scouter as she pinged Nappa off a boulder. What you're doing, recruit? You almost took me out with that. Elder Kai yelled. If only Puddin could be so lucky. Deciding against antagonizing the elderly god, Puddin just jerked her leg straight up, lifting the still screaming Nappa way up into the air, before swinging him straight down into the ground. He impacted with a loud boom as he cracked through the stony ground and sank almost down almost half a foot. She bit her lip in concentration as she carefully unwound her leg from Nappa's wrist and retracted it back to her. She shook her foot a bit to get rid of the numbness. "Whoa," said Gohan. "Yeah, I'm pretty awesome," Puddin said, giving the boy a smile and a wink. Piccolo suddenly groaned and seemed to finally come back to consciousness. "What the hell?" "Don't worry, Piccolo," Puddin said as she dropped to the ground. "I've got this." On the other side of the battlefield, Vegeta was beginning to look impatient. "Nappa, get up." Nappa braced his hands on the stone and tried to push himself up. His head held fast in the stone for a second before it came free with a pop. "Hey Vegeta, that girl. What about her? She has legs for days." "God damn it, Nappa, if you don't kill those idiots in the next 5 seconds, I'm going to start sawing off your legs." After Nappa shook the dust off his head and dug a loose pebble out of his ear, he smiled at the fighters and got ready to attack again. The Z warriors shuddered in the face of this incredible foe, but they prepared themselves nonetheless to battle him. As Puddin sank into a new fighting stance, ready to do anything it took to protect the necessary Z warriors, a ping sounded from her scouter. Raising a curious eyebrow, she tapped the button on the side of the headset. "What's up?" she asked. "Puddin, it's Chronoa. We've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Goku has just arrived back on Earth, but there's a huge power signature standing in his way. You need to head toward him immediately and find out what's going on." "On it," Puddin said with a nod. "You hear that, old man? Stop calling me old." Elder Kai snapped over the comms. "And yes, I heard it. I'm not deaf." "Not yet, anyway," said Chronoa. Puddin turned off the comms before the two of them could really get into it. As she did so, the other Z warriors were getting ready for the next onslaught from Nappa. He's a monster," panted Piccolo. "We can barely keep up with him," gasped Tien. "And he's not even trying." "Don't worry, guys," said Krillin, trying to sound confident. "Things may look bad, but we've got the Rainbow Angel on our side. There's no way we'll lose as long as we stay." "Hey, guys, I'm really sorry about this," said Puddin, giving the Z warriors a quick wave. "Something just came up and I really need to run. I'll be back as soon as I can." She smiled and gave them a thumbs up. "You got this, Naya." With that, she flew off with a flash of pink mana energy. The wasteland was silent for a long moment. "Aw man," whimpered Krillin. Sandy wasteland gave way to grassy plains as Puddin chased the power signatures on her scouter. The wind whipped at her ponytail as she flew as fast as she could, eager to complete her mission. Finally, after almost a minute of flying, she could see signs of fighting on the horizon. Bursts of kinetic force from super speed and super strength, mixed in with the odd light of an energy blast. She poured on her speed as she zoomed toward the conflict. When the fighters came within sight, Puddin had to admit she was stunned. For a second, she could swear there were 2 Gokus, but that couldn't be possible. Neither of the power signatures was nearly big enough to suggest that one of them was a god, so that ruled out Goku Black. While one of them was dressed up in Goku's regular GI, the other was wearing space armor. "Who?" Puddin said in confusion. She squeezed her eyes shut and tapped on her forehead. "Wait. I know this. I know this. He's, Turles." Chronoa yelled over the comm line. "Turles. That was it." Puddin snapped her fingers. "It was right on the tip of my tongue. Thanks, Chronoa." What is he doing here?" stuttered Elder Kai. "He's from the non-canon timelines. He can't be here." "Well, I guess we all need glasses then," Puddin muttered and rolled her eyes, "because there he is, right there." Goku and Turles darted through the air, slamming into each other over and over again to try and knock the other out of the sky. Goku seemed intent on getting around Turles while Turles just kept blocking his way. "Come on," yelled Goku. "Any other day I'd love to spar with you, but I need to get through. I have to save my friends. And my enemy. And also my son." "Ha," scoffed Turles. "Any sparring between us would end with you in pieces, seeing as the gap between us only ever increases." "Hey," Goku said, offended. Puddin blinked. "Wait, is he?" "But no," Turles said with a shake of his head, "it is not you that I have come here to test." Then, Puddin saw Turles look over his shoulder and lock eyes with her. He grinned. But this pea, finally descending from her nest. "Oh my god, he is." Said Puddin, totally confused. "Why are you doing that?" Turles sneered. "Ah, you ask why I have taken to speaking in rhyme. Well, that's quite simple. You took too much time. Well, excuse me if I haven't figured out instant transmission yet," Puddin said, putting her hands up so she was ready to fight. Her face turned serious. "Why are you here, Turles?" "And of course, it's straight to business, straight to your goal," he said with a sigh. "That's the most annoying thing about you, Time Patrol. That's what you miss out on, your order of dogs. You don't understand the value of proper dialogues." Puddin stared at Turles, trying to figure out if she had somehow imagined the words that had just come out of his mouth. She sucked in a breath before blasting forward in a punch that Turles easily blocked. "Sorry, what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice as casual as she could. "I don't know what you mean by that. Puddin, you need not play dumb on my account," Turles said as they continued to exchange blow after blow. "My employer has mentioned you a considerable amount." "Okay. Seriously, how are you talking like that?" Puddin demanded as the Saiyan leaned back to avoid one of her kicks. "Did you figure all this out beforehand or are you just making it up as you go?" "Though it pains me to ever give a patroller an oath," Turles said with a shrug and a smarmy look on his face. "I will honestly swear that it is a little of both." Puddin blinked as she blocked a kick. "But, how do you know who I am?" Puddin asked. Turles backed away and crossed his arms. "I watched you the moment your Time Patroller career began. When you killed off this idiot," he jerked his thumb in Goku's direction, "I became a real fan." His grin somehow seemed to grow even wider. "Your mission endangered you so you did what you must. So you took action and made him bite the dust. I laughed so hard I thought I could choke. But the thought of us being foes," now he dramatically clutched at his chest. "My heart nearly broke." "Okay. This is getting creepy," said Puddin. She snapped her hand up and gathered mana in her palm before releasing it in a bright blue blast. The huge energy ball streaked through the air, swallowing Turles and streaking off into the sky. As the blast flew off and disappeared from sight, Puddin allowed herself to sigh in relief. Finally. Miss, Goku interrupted. "What?" she groaned. "I'm still sensing him." "What?" Puddin tapped her scouter, trying to narrow down the location of Turles' power level. "Puddin." Chronoa yelled from Puddin's communicator. "Turles is behind you," Turles purred. Puddin hissed and spun, swinging her fist around in a wild backfist. Turles blocked her attack and responded with an uppercut. His fist connected with Puddin's side, making her let out a surprised cough. Anger flowed in to replace the wasted air so she bared her teeth and kicked him. Turles managed to block that attack as well, but he was sent flying back several feet from the force. He looked at Puddin appreciatively as he shook out the arm that had blocked her kick. "Your bosses called you a loose cannon, of that I am sure," he continued, that infuriating smile still on his face. "They want you to be pathetic, weak, and demure. They said you were reckless, that you need to be fixed. They're only worried that they will someday be eclipsed. That's how they control you. Come on, can't you see? Why be like them?" Now he extended a hand out toward her. "When you can come with me." Puddin's jaw dropped as she stared at the evil Saiyan. It was ludicrous. She had to be hearing things. There was no way that this had suddenly become her life. You're absolutely perfect. No fixing required, Turles purred. Anyone who says otherwise is a complete liar. Elder Kai yelled in Puddin's ear, making her wince from the feedback. Don't you listen to a single word he says, Puddin. He's completely evil. Wow, said Goku, who was now sitting cross-legged on the Nimbus cloud. This is pretty intense. Reminds me of this Christmas movie that we. Don't you dare talk to me about Christmas. Puddin and Turles roared at the same time. Goku was so surprised that he almost fell off the cloud. A moment of silence passed before Puddin turned back to stare at Turles, confused. That confusion was mirrored in his own expression before he smiled at her again. But this was a different smile. There was a much lower amount of malice in it this time. As far as Puddin could tell, this was an entirely genuine smile coming from an entirely evil person. Ah, he said, I should have seen it right from the start. Truly, you are a woman after my own heart. Puddin swallowed as a shudder of revulsion trailed up her spine. Ew, she said, giving him a withering glare. So ew. I have a very strict policy on not people that look like this idiot. Now she was the one jerking a thumb in Goku's direction. Hey, Goku said, offended. I'm not an. Yes, you are. Shut the up. Puddin snapped. Fortunately, he shut the up. Well, perhaps an offer you might someday consider, said Turles. Maybe one day, we could meet again and have an honest conversation. Puddin's eyebrows quirked before she gave him a cat smirk. What was that? She asked. Did you finally run out of steam? Maybe making rhymes ended up being too lean. Mean. Not a dream. See. Not so easy, is it? To make up a rhyme. Turles looked to the side before refocusing on Puddin. But as it stands, we're about to be interrupted, so I don't have the time. I guess we'll be seeing each other in a year or two. Until then, fair Puddin, I bid you adieu. Then the stupid Goku copycat actually bowed to her before suddenly blasting off away from them. Puddin blinked. Did I win? Then, there was a sudden explosion of air as an object moving at several times the speed of sound suddenly came to a dead stop. Puddin covered her eyes against the wind pressure but snuck a peek when the wind had died down. Her face broke into an immense smile as she saw the source of the blast. Dad, she yelled, zooming forward to scoop Dumplin' up in a hug. Sweetheart, he yelled, returning the hug with equal force. I missed you. I missed you too, so much. How are you? What are you doing here? How was your mission? Did you bring me any presents? Naya, I'm so glad you're here. Dumplin' gave her a strong pat on her back and the two of them let go, smiling at each other like a pair of loons. As happy as I am to see you, sweetie, Dumplin' said, I'm technically still on the job. He patted her shoulder before letting go. I'll see you back at home real soon. We'll catch up then. Love you. And with that, he blasted off in the direction Turles had fled. I love you too, Puddin yelled after him. While she was sad to see him go, it was still great that she had had the chance to see him after such a long mission. As she looked after him, she found something troubling her. Did I forget something? She asked. Did I leave the oven on? Miss. Oh right. Goku was here. She turned to face the only good Saiyan. What is it? She asked. Any chance you could help me save my friends? Oh right. Puddin said, snapping her fingers. That's what I was forgetting. You're right. Let's go. And with that, the two of them blasted off toward where Puddin had come from. Despite that strange interruption, she still had a mission. And it was one Puddin was determined to accomplish. The situation looked rather bad for the defenders of Earth. The wasteland battleground had been reduced to a field of blood and broken stone. Rock pillars had collapsed and deep trenches had been gouged out of the ground. More than half of the defenders had been killed, the latest of whom had been that Namekian who had thrown in with the Earthlings. All that was left were the child and the tiny bald one. All in all, Vegeta figured that it had been a rather disappointing day. None of these fighters could even hold a space candle to Nappa, let alone him. The big oaf was looking back and forth between the last two survivors, looking like he was debating which of their heads to pop off first. Nappa. Vegeta snapped at his underling. Get your head on straight and stop playing with your food. This planet isn't going to destroy itself. Actually, I think they might be well on their way toward that, Vegeta, Nappa said. I mean, look at this place. Pollution in the ocean, greenhouse gases out of control, and they're even burning their forests to cinders. He shrugged. I mean, if we left and came back in 100 years or so, this place would probably be dead anyway. You know, maybe we could. Shut the hell up and kill them, you idiot. Vegeta roared. Sure thing, Vegeta, Nappa called. He turned back to the bruised and beaten child. Sorry. This has been a lot of fun, but we gotta wrap this up. Vegeta hasn't eaten yet today and he gets into a Super Saiyan tantrum when he's hangry. Hope you had as much fun as I did. I, really, didn't, grunted Gohan. Well, at least I had fun, Nappa said with a grin. He suddenly flared with ki energy and pulled back his arm, charging up for a huge energy attack. Bye kid. See you around. Crap baskets, moaned Gohan. Rah, roared Nappa, releasing the blast directly at Gohan. The boy shut his eyes in preparation. Then something unbelievable happened. The blast somehow broke. It shot off upward, left, and right, almost like water from a fire hose being blasted at an unyielding boulder. Vegeta watched with wide eyes as Nappa gave a curious grunt and released the flow of ki. As the energy died down, he could finally see what had stopped the blast. What? Nappa gasped in shock. That colorful goo girl stood right in front of him, her arms crossed and with a hard expression on her face. She stared him dead in the eye as she tapped a finger against her bicep, the soft sounds it made still seeming to echo across the wasteland. Vegeta stared. That shouldn't be possible. He'd seen Nappa use blasts like that to turn continents into vacant lots. How could she still be standing? He hurriedly affixed the scouter to his ear and clicked the button to bring up her power level. After a second, he was confused that nothing was happening yet. Was this thing defective? Damn it, he grunted. I forgot I turned it off. All of you just stay right where you are. As he clicked the power button, Nappa glanced back at him. Vegeta, Nappa said, sounding nervous. I'm not sure this girl has blinked since she got here. Also, I think I can see the heat death of the universe reflected in her eyes. Can you tag in? Goddammit, Nappa, shut up. Vegeta snapped as the startup logos appeared on the scouter eyepiece. You're just seeing the reflection of your ugly mug. Calm down. After the third company logo flashed over the eyepiece, the scouter finally reached the main menu. Vegeta, Nappa said. This girl is showing a lot of teeth. Just be quiet, Nappa, said Vegeta as he focused the scouter on the goo girl. He pressed the button and the device scanned her power levels. The scouter beeped for a second before a new text box popped up. Vegeta stared at the text, completely dumbfounded. He blinked, but the number didn't change. Then he threw his head back and laughed. Ah ha ha ha. This pile of goo has a power level of 0. 0. Nappa cried, staring at Vegeta. That can't be possible, can it? Vegeta continued to laugh, both at the absurdity of the situation and at the stupid look on Nappa's face. Every being in the galaxy had a power level of at least 1, but this planet had somehow managed to beat the odds and become even more pathetic. Oh my god, Nappa, Vegeta said, shaking his head. You almost had me going with that laser blast, but I think it's time to stop with the games. Go ahead and kill her now. Said Nappa, staring at the goo girl with an unnerved expression. You can try, said the goo girl, who still hadn't blinked, but you will fail. Vegeta saw a flash of orange enter the battlefield and he grinned as the man they had come for finally revealed himself. Well, said the prince. Looks like you've finally decided to show up, Kakarot. And here I thought we'd need to spend a few hours slaughtering people to get your attention. The low-class weakling had the absolute gall to turn his back on Vegeta and give his attention to the child and the dwarf. Vegeta was opening his mouth to yell at Kakarot when the whole wasteland was suddenly rocked by a deafening explosion. Whipping his head around, shattered boulders littered the ground and clouds of dust hung in the air in a straight line of destruction. In the distance, Vegeta heard a sing-song voice say, Nappa. Oh, Nappa. Puddin wants to play eh? Vegeta wondered that the goo girl should sound so confident after Nappa had unleashed such an attack. However, he did not have much time to dwell on that odd fact before Kakarot leapt away from his pitiful friends and stood on a spire. You killed my friends, said Kakarot, and I know I should beat you up for that, but you can make a choice. The man suddenly gained an expression of sickening self-righteousness. If you apologize now and promise to leave, I'll let you go and we can stop this meaningless bloodshed. You, let me go, Vegeta said with a sneer. I think Nappa could learn a thing or two about decent jokes from you. That was actually pretty funny. He rolled his eyes. You, some low-level trash, beating a Saiyan elite. That goes against the laws of the universe itself. In that case, said Kakarot, going into a low fighting stance, looks like I'll just have to kick you right off our planet. Vegeta followed suit and got ready for battle. A dark aura rose from his limbs and his eyes gave a red shine. He always felt amazing before getting to kill someone, but today he felt extra amazing. Super amazing, even. Oh, you won't be holding onto that bravado for long, Kakarot. Vegeta cackled. I'm pretty sure you won't last 5 minutes. When they charged at each other, everything devolved into a storm of punches and kicks. They dodged around the wasteland, blasting through the air and shooting off blasts of destructive energy in an attempt to overcome one another. The pitched battle seemed to go on for hours, but in reality, it lasted less than 4 minutes. Thus, the battle came to its inevitable conclusion, with Vegeta standing proudly and the low-level trash barely conscious. Kakarot was dangling limply, the fight completely leaving his limbs as Vegeta held him up by the collar of his shirt. Ah ha 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 ha, cackled Vegeta, an impossibly wide smile on his face. This is all you can give me? You had me thinking you would at least be a minor workout. Kakarot cracked open one eye and looked like he was trying to say something, but the only sound he made were pain-filled gasps. Ah, you seem upset, Kakarot. Don't worry, though, I'll make sure you live long enough to watch this planet be destroyed before you can die. Vegeta laughed once more, letting the sound of his rightful victory echo throughout the land. Seriously. Vegeta stopped laughing and turned around with a glare. Who would dare interrupt the victory celebration of the Saiyan Prince? The multicolored goo girl stood on one of the only rock pillars that still survived. She had her arms crossed and she looked annoyed, tapping her foot in a disappointed rhythm. You really couldn't have lasted for another 30 seconds, Goku. She demanded, her voice dripping with disgust. Wow. I mean, I knew that you had some mess-ups across history, but wow. Vegeta blinked in confusion. What the? He muttered before becoming angry. Hey, where in the hell did Nappa go? I told him to kill you. Nappa is gone, she said with a shrug. Then her eyes took on a threatening glint. And, seeing as Earth's greatest defender was about as useless as the G in lasagna, looks like I'll have to take care of you too. A moment later, she blinked and sighed before lifting a hand to her scouter. I know, I'm not going to kill him. I'll be extra careful this time. Vegeta cackled as he callously tossed Kakarot aside and opened his arms in a welcoming gesture. You, kill me. I've defeated Kakarot, your planet's strongest champion. What could a pathetic weakling like you possibly do? You won't even last. 5 minutes later, his body hurt, his bones hurt, his organs hurt, but even more than that, his pride hurt. Vegeta stretched his arm a few inches forward, his fingers scrambling against broken rocks and scattered dust. It was a weak handhold, but he managed to pull himself forward just a bit. The shattered remains of his armor scrapped across the ground, making his countless wounds flare up in pain and leaving a trail of blood behind him. No, he whimpered, tears falling from his eyes to mix with the blood dripping from his head wounds. One of his eyes was swelling shut and his vision was getting blurry. No, help, please, Nappa. I already told you. Nappa is gone, Vegeta. That voice. Just a simple sentence was enough to send a shudder of primal terror shooting up Vegeta's spine. The prince was not accustomed to experiencing fear. He had spent a great deal of time creating fear in other beings, but being afraid himself was an unusual situation. Vegeta would likely be embarrassed if he didn't feel like he was about to soil himself. Then he heard the crunch of her boots against the rocks. His breathing grew faster. She was coming. He could feel the icy black hand of death seize his heart in its merciless clutches. She was coming to kill him. Vegeta squeezed his eyes shut and wept, his teeth gritting so hard together they felt like they might crack. Something eclipsed the sun above him, blocking his agony from the gaze of the unfeeling universe. He whimpered pitifully as he prayed to any deity that may exist that his torment would at least be over quickly. At the barest edge of his senses, he felt fingers wrap around his tail. For a moment, his usual arrogance bled into his mind. So she thought that she could weaken him by squeezing his tail. Like he was some ordinary low-class trash. Was she hoping to make him beg for his life while she... But then the hand pulled up, yanking his tail right off. The flare of pain was almost lost in the inferno of agony that his body was currently experiencing, but the tail's departure was the death blow to Vegeta's Saiyan pride. Truly, this she-devil had at last taken everything from him. Vegeta cracked open one of his eyes to see the hot pink shoes right in front of him. He could still see his blood staining the fabric. Maybe she wanted to spend some time kicking him, as a way to make the dye job more permanent. Then a hand grabbed him by the single remaining shoulder strap of his armor and turned him over onto his back. Of course, he should have known. This monster would not be satisfied with anything less than watching the light leave his eyes. It made sense, and it is definitely what Vegeta would do if he were in her position. There was no better way to savor a kill after completely destroying your enemy in every conceivable way. He could barely make out her features through the murky tears in his eyes. She stared down at him with those demonic blue eyes, and her cat-like mouth smirked down at him, giving him just the faintest look at a razor-sharp tooth. She crouched down to loom over him, leaning back on her heels and resting her elbows on her knees. I bet you're feeling really silly for coming here in the first place, aren't ya? She asked. Probably should have stuck at being a squad of 3 Saiyans against the galaxy. Now there's only you. She leaned her head against her fist and her smile widened mockingly. The oh-so-powerful prince must be oh-so embarrassed. Why? He choked out through his tears, why won't you just kill me? The monster rolled her eyes and reached inside his broken armor. Ah, so she wanted to disembowel him by hand. That was a nice touch, the mark of an expert. Vegeta himself was quite fond of it. Only this creature didn't begin pulling out his organs one by one. Instead, she pulled out the controller for his space pod. After a few button presses, she carelessly tossed the device away and went back to smiling at him. Turn that frown upside down, Princey. Because guess what? You're not dying today. Because, well, let's be honest. She leaned closer and gave him a smile filled with fangs. You're not even worth it. Vegeta stared up at her, absolutely stunned. He was so confused at this sudden change from what he had been expecting that he barely noticed his space pod drift down to land a few meters away. She laughed lightly to herself before grabbing Vegeta by one of his shattered legs and dragging him toward the pod. Here's your Uber, Your Highness, she said in a cheery voice as she bodily picked him up and dumped him into the seat. He'll make sure you get home safely. Make sure you don't get too much blood on the seat, don't throw up on the floor, and most of all, she leaned toward his face, her eyes flashing dangerously. Remember this the next time you think about dropping by Earth again. Okay. Vegeta couldn't speak. He felt like he had an entire space apple stuck in his throat. All he could manage was a little nod. All right. Have a safe trip. She pressed the button marked tactical withdrawal, and stepped back, giving Vegeta a cheeky wave as the door closed. Moments later, the pod flew away. Vegeta sat there in silence and darkness, his mind still spinning with what had just happened. He had come to this planet expecting a quick battle against pathetic weaklings followed by achieving immortality and then an eternity of combat. But nothing had happened according to plan. He had expected death. He had tasted death. But now he flew through space, leaving this planet behind with his life. Because she let me go. Because I wasn't even worth killing. Vegeta's pride could not take this final blow. It seized up and left his body in a stream of angry tears. Puddin returned to the time nest with her head held high, trying to seem like she was brimming with achievement and confidence. However, it was a mask. Inside, her emotions were roiling as her stomach twisted itself into knots. She felt like things had gone well enough, but what if they hadn't? What if she did something wrong in her mission? Had she gone overboard on Vegeta? Puddin tried to swallow down her apprehensions as she took in the state of the time nest. Kronoa was standing at the large table in the center, watching as the projected display changed from the tunnels of the time gate to Puddin's view of the room. Toki Toki, Kronoa's pet bird, sat on his perch preening his feathers. The shine from another time gate died down from beside her and Elder Kai stepped into the room, still wearing those ridiculous mustache glasses. His old, gnarled hands were clasped behind his back as he moved to the center table to stand beside Kronoa, leaving Puddin to stand uncomfortably at attention. When Kronoa turned to face Puddin with a smile, she allowed herself to relax just a bit. Well done, Puddin, Kronoa said with a nod of approval. Not only did you complete your mission to ensure time stayed on the correct course, but you also dealt with unusual interference from outside forces. As far as I'm concerned, I'd consider that a mission thoroughly accomplished. Puddin's heart skipped a beat at that statement. She felt like she could cry. She felt like she could just melt into a puddle right then and there out of sheer relief. Oh, my Kami, Puddin said with a great big exhale. Supreme Kai Kronoa, I'm so glad you think I did a good job. Your technique could still use a little improvement, grumbled Elder Kai. And I think you went a little too hard on the emotional damage right there at the end. Oh, loosen up, old man, Kronoa said, putting her hands on her hips and rolling her eyes. Puddin did great. That's all that matters. Damn right, she did. Yelled a voice that loudly echoed around the time nest. The three of them started before looking up the huge staircase leading to the entrance. Two figures stood at the top. On the left stood Trunks, dressed as always in his drab trenchcoat with the fuzzy collar. And next to him was Daddy. Puddin cried out, leaping into the air. Dumplin smiled and opened his arms for her to fly up and hug him. Sweetheart, he said happily as he spun her around. Oh, Daddy missed you so much. I missed you too, she said, nuzzling into his shoulder. You were gone for such a long time. Well, I'm back now and I think this calls for a celebration. Cookies for dinner and pizza for dessert. Naya, Puddin said excitedly. Sounds awesome. Puddin had a blinding smile on her face as she pulled away from him. He was smiling up at her just as much. Dumplin, a word, please. The reunited father and daughter broke apart and looked toward the center of the room. Trunks had already reached the pair of gods and Chronoa was looking up at Dumplin with her arms crossed. I'd like to have an update on your mission, she said, sounding impatient. Sure thing, Dumplin said as he and Puddin both descended the stairs. In an instant, his expression had become troubled, almost apprehensive. As they reached the landing, Puddin found herself wondering what could make her father react like that. Wadea wanna know. For starters, she said, what happened with Turles? Little bastard got away, Dumplin muttered, crossing his arms and pouting. He ducked through a time gate and I wasn't close enough to catch him. No idea where or when he went. HRRMM, said Elder Kai. That is most concerning. Not only is someone from a non-canon timeline interfering with historical events, but they seem to be able to freely move through time just as well as we can. Any idea what he was doing there? Anyone? Other than hitting on me and doing verses? Grumbled Puddin. She was still angry over that. Even beating up Vegeta hadn't taken that edge off. It seems like he was draining energy from the time warp caused by the Saiyan's arrival, answered Trunks, stroking his chin in thought. But to what end? That is what I was considering, Elder Kai said with a nod. With people like Turles showing up in the wrong time and place, who could be behind this all, I wonder. Dumplin gave a mighty groan of annoyance. Oh, I don't know, he said with feigned sincerity, maybe the same people who were behind this scheme the last time. Puddin somehow managed to choke on thin air. She coughed and was gagging before Dumplin stretched a hand up to thump her on the back. What? She said once she could breathe again. You really think it's her? Dumplin nodded with a grunt. It's got her mo all over it, sweetie. I'm certain of that. Puddin swallowed, feeling her heart travel down into her stomach. Whom do you speak of? Asked Elder Kai, scratching his chin in curiosity. HMPH, Dumplin scoffed and rolled his eyes. So, this is what passes for non-thonic divinity these days. Elder Kai looked like he was about to reprimand Dumplin, but the conversation continued before he had the chance. The ones who brought us closest to disaster in the past, Chronoa said, staring hard at the floor before lifting her eyes to the rest of them. The demon scientist Tawa and her abominable creation Mira. Puddin saw Dumplin's hand curl into a fist. My ex-wife, he growled. That bitch. That makes sense, Trunks said with a nod. She has advanced knowledge of time magic and she's just evil and heartless enough to make another play at ruining the timeline. He shook his head. She's even dumber than I thought if she thinks the same trick will work twice. Suddenly, Dumplin swung out to slap Trunks on the back of the head. The young man almost pitched forward from the force of the blow. Don't you dare talk about my wife like that, Dumplin roared. As Trunks winced and rubbed his head, muttering all the while, Chronoa glared at Dumplin with her arms crossed. Dumplin, she said in an annoyed voice, we talked about this. You need to pick a side and stick to it. Actually, if we're being pedantic, you were the one doing all the talking, Dumplin said. I just stood there and pretended to listen. The childlike god gave him an annoyed pout before returning to the topic at hand. Anyway, it stands to reason that Tawa and Mira are up to their old tricks again. We'll likely see a lot more of them in the future. Puddin suddenly felt like she might be sick. With one hand cradling her stomach, she timidly raised the other. Can I please be excused? Puddin asked. Yeah, let's both get out of here, said Dumplin, giving her a comforting smile and gently placing a hand on the small of her back. We can finish up later, Chronoa, he added when the child deity looked like she was about to protest. The two best time patrollers in the universe need to get some food and beauty sleep. As Puddin and her father turned to leave, Trunks asked, how can she be one of the best if? Trunks trailed off awkwardly after he caught the expressions of Chronoa's and Elder Kai's face, but it was too late. Dumplin froze and slowly turned to face Trunks and the Kais, his eyes promising nothing short of brutal murder. What was that? Dumplin growled. An aura of dark mana started to drift off his body. Kronoa and Elder Kai both shuddered. You heard Kronoa on the comms before, didn't you? Puddin almost failed her first mission, Trunks said, looking at Dumplin in confusion. She's on probation. I always put the comms on mute, Dumplin answered. It distracts me from doing my job. The demon god's aura began to grow darker as he bared his teeth. Now what in the air you talking about, Trunks? Who's trying to sink my little girl's career? Who do I need to kill? Daddy, Puddin said hesitantly. She was barely keeping her lunch down. Tremors shot down her spine and made her feet feel like lead. It's my fault. I really messed up. That seemed to take the wind right out of Dumplin's sails. He stared at her, shock etched on his face. Puddin, he said. She didn't think she'd ever heard his voice sound that small. Kronoa interjected, sounding a little awkward, think the two of you need to have a talk. Dumplin, make sure you come to my office tomorrow. Dumplin gave no indication that he heard her as he and Puddin climbed the stairs and left the time nest. It was a long, quiet walk back to their home. The far future. A silent, mournful wind blew across the cracked and scorched earth, tiny clouds of dust being picked up before settling down again a few feet later. Recent deep cleaning. All pests removed. A few rays of light managed to squeeze through some gaps in the clouds to illuminate the shattered, crumbling buildings. Metal supports twisted out of shape from extreme heat and entire walls of brick and cement reduced to piles of debris. Lighting could be better. Truly, this was a desolate, pointless world. And yet, a bit of a fixer-upper, but it's a bargain at that price. Cooler closed his eyes and let out a long breath. Damn it, he was doing it again. Even though he barely ever spoke to his father, those endless lessons on sales pitches still echoed in his mind. By this point it had just become a habit to make one for every new planet he landed on. He crossed his arms and glared down at the ground, his tail flicking with irritation as he sat on the building rooftop with his feet hanging over the edge. How much longer did she expect them to wait? For a self-proclaimed demon mistress of time, she didn't seem to be particularly timely. The apocalyptic calm was abruptly shattered by a sudden explosion. Cooler languidly glanced up to see that a building in the distance had suddenly spouted a burning crater and was in the process of toppling to the ground. The crash echoed across the ruined city before finally reaching his ears. Cooler scoffed and scowled at the figure that so closely resembled the Saiyan he hated. Looks like the monkey is getting bored, he said dismissively. I heard that. Ice breath. Turles shouted from the ground. I'm surprised you can even hear anything over the chattering of your fleas. Fleas, you say? Surely, you are mistaken. We'll see what happens when Oh my god, will you just shut up already? Yelled Cooler. I am so sick of your rhymes that I almost wish I was dead so I didn't have to hear them. Turles gritted his teeth as he glared up at Cooler. Off to the side, the big Namekian known as Lord Slug just stood there holding up a wall. He'd been silent for hours, which is just the way Cooler preferred him. His singing was almost as grating as Turles' rhymes. The ugly monkey looked like he was about to start another angry soliloquy when all three of them heard the sound of someone clearing their throat. Cooler's irritation dissipated somewhat as he turned to the new arrival. She was a blue woman with pointed ears and a skin-tight red and black catsuit. She was leaning on a large staff as she looked them over with impassive eyes. Tawa, Cooler said as he pushed himself off the edge of the building and drifted gently to the ground. How kind of you to join us. We were starting to think you weren't coming. I was quite busy making sure our plan doesn't fall to pieces, Tawa said dismissively. Seeing as I am the only one with anything more than a half-baked idea of the scientific method, my time is vital to our success. Cooler's eyes narrowed at the obvious insult. Once upon a time, he would have destroyed an entire continent over such an insult. Maybe a planet if he was in a particularly bad mood. But now, all he could do was stew in silence. He saw that Turles and Slug made much more obvious expressions of disapproval. He would show no such thoughts. He was above them. This woman had saved his life and she was giving him the chance to have his revenge on the Saiyan trash that had almost killed him. If she felt the need to insult him while she worked, he could put up with that. For now, anyway. A new figure landed next to Tawa and Cooler looked him up and down warily. He knew that Mira acted under Tawa's command, but he still felt cautious. The demon man had the look of a space hound that was just a few moments away from snapping its leash off. Cooler didn't like him, and he sure as hell didn't trust him. I told you never to act on your own, Mira said to Turles and Slug, his voice gruff and commanding. What we do is none of your damn business, grumbled Slug. Now, Mira, Tawa chided, smiling up at her creation. They are doing their job quite well. The timeline is in chaos and the patrollers are running around like maniacs. We're right where we want to be for the next phase of the plan. She looked back to the three of them and stepped forward, putting a hand behind her back. Speaking of which, she said before pulling a burlap sack from behind her back and offering it to Turles. Here's what you wanted. You and Slug know what you need to do. Right away, my dark lady, Turles purred, smirking in a manner that was clearly intended to be sultry. Cooler turned his head away from the disgusting display, his tail swishing in annoyance at the sheer lack of professionalism. With a wink to the demon woman, Turles turned and walked away with Slug following behind him. They traveled a few yards before they both disappeared into the time stream. What shall I do? Cooler asked, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. Shall I stand around looking pretty? Should I put on a pot of tea for all of us? Do not worry yourself, Cooler, Tawa said, giving him a sidelong look. I know just the job for you to be responsible for. But first, we must have a meeting with our dear little friend. Her gaze turned to the distance and her smile widened. Ah, wonderful. We were just talking about you. Cooler and Mira followed her gaze to see that a new figure had appeared. They stood in the shadow of a crumbling building, a featureless white mask covering their face. What news do you have? Tawa asked. The time patrol is becoming chaotic, like you predicted, they answered. Chronoa and Elder Kai are struggling to find enough patrollers to combat all of the time warps. They even pulled Putin out of remedial training to fight the Saiyans. For a split second, Tawa had a look of disgust on her face before she smoothed it back into a neutral and haughty expression. And what of the bird? Your estimates were correct. Toki will be laying an egg soon. Good. Very good. I want you to inform me the moment it happens. That egg is vital for our plan to work. The figure was silent for a bit before they said, just as long as you hold up your end of the bargain, Tawa. I always pay my debts, Tawa said with a smile. Now go back to Conton City. Don't do anything that might draw undue attention to yourself. I'll contact you again soon. The figure nodded and turned away before vanishing from sight. Come, Mira, Cooler, said Tawa, rising into the air. Mira followed without a sound. Where are we going? Cooler asked, also taking off. To war, my dear Cooler. To war. Silence hung like a heavy shroud over the dining table. Puddin stared down at her mug of tea that could now be considered lukewarm at best. She took a sip of it in a feeble attempt to avoid speaking. She was punished for this by the taste of bitter and barely edible tea. She didn't know what else to say. She already felt like her guts had been filled with stones. Saying much else could very well kill her from shame. Well, said Dumplin from across the table, is that everything? She dared to take a quick peek at her father. His own mug of tea was forgotten off to the side and he had his hands folded on top of the table. His expression was, she wasn't sure what it was. Expectant. Worried. Puddin felt a squirming sensation in her throat and stared back down at her tea. Nope, she said, her voice pitifully small. That's it. I got my first mission and, she sighed. I ate it up. I'm sorry, Daddy. I let you down. Ah, don't worry about it, sweetheart. Puddin blinked and stared at Dumplin. Now he was just giving her a small, simple smile. I was thinking that it must have been some big mistake, but that's not something worth getting all weepy about. You're doing fine. Puddin stared at her father, not quite comprehending what he had just said. What? But I broke the rules. I almost caused an entire mission to fail. Dumplin waved away her argument. Sweetie, I break the rules on a daily basis. The reason they let it slide is that I'm the toughest guy here and they're all scared shitless of me. Now he grinned evilly at her. You just need to do the same. Strike the fear of you into these ers and they'll quickly learn to back the off. It may take some practice, but you'll get there. He gave her a thumbs up and a wink. After all, you've got part of me in you. There's no way you could lose. Puddin just couldn't stop staring at him. Her mind was spinning. He wasn't mad. He didn't even seem disappointed. What was she even supposed to do with this? How? She asked, ing her head to the side in confusion. What do I do? First things first, you deal with this whole probation thing, Dumplin said, rolling his eyes and giving the word air quotes. You shouldn't have even taken it in the first place. We only take the punishments we deserve, sweetie, and I sure as hell know you don't deserve to be punished because the other guy was a weakling. Puddin looked back down at her tea, mulling over her dad's words. Well, I think I get what you're saying, she said finally. When she looked back up, she gave him a lopsided smile. And I did totally nail that last mission, right? Hell yeah, you did. Dumplin yelled, slamming his palm on the table. Make sure everyone in this stupid little time cult really knows what a first-class badass looks like. He leaned forward and cupped a hand around his mouth before speaking in a stage whisper. It looks like me and you. Puddin giggled and nodded in agreement. She actually did feel better. Thanks, Daddy. I think I really needed to hear that. Dumplin smiled and patted her hand. Don't you worry, sweetie. You and I are both gonna be on the top of this pecking order before you know it. As Puddin's face brightened, a wave of fatigue suddenly settled on her shoulders. It was probably her exhaustion catching up with her now that the adrenaline surge of this conversation had finally ended. She yawned and stood up. It's been a long day, Daddy. I think I'm gonna go to bed early. All right, sweetie, said Dumplin. He flew up to give her a kiss on the cheek. Love you. Love you too. Good night. Puddin waved over her shoulder as she left the dining room and went to her bedroom. When she finally climbed under the covers, she closed her eyes and fell asleep with a smile on her face. Tomorrow would be a brand new day. A fine day to continue her winning streak. Puddin could hardly wait. Breath in, breath out, shoulders back, feet planted, arms straight, energy high. Okay, let's do this. Big bang attack. In response to her cry, energy coalesced in Puddin's palm to form a sphere, crackling with lightning. After it hung in the air for a fraction of a second, it shot forward like a cannonball, propelled by Puddin's will alone. It streaked across the sky until it finally made impact with a mountain far off in the distance. There was a moment of silence, like the world took a massive breath of anticipation. Then the explosion happened. Puddin was buffeted by shockwaves and her ears rang with the noise as the blast grew to encompass the entire horizon. After a moment of blinding light, the explosion faded, leaving a mushroom cloud of dust in its place. Puddin looked upon the destruction she had wrought and smiled in satisfaction. Absolutely pathetic. Puddin snarled as she wheeled around to face the Echo fighter designed to mimic Vegeta. The hell is your problem? She demanded. Did you see that? You know what that mountain is? Destroyed? That's what. Wow. Echo Vegeta drawled, rolling his eyes. One whole mountain. How amazing. He scoffed and glared at Puddin. Their eyes were at about the same level, but his hair towered over her. I thought you came to me because you wanted to learn real power. You'll barely even crack a planet open if this shitshow is the best you can do. He scowled and pointed at the crater where the mountain had once been. Just look at it. The crater is totally lopsided. You can't even make a circle right. How in the hell do you think you're ever gonna be? Smack. The slap to the face nearly knocked Vegeta off his feet. He stumbled back a step, holding his cheek. His disbelieving eyes blinked rapidly, like his brain was struggling to come to terms with what had happened. How dare, he began, turning the full face of his Saiyan fury on Puddin. Whatever you have to say, said Puddin, her eyes sharp as daggers, I've already heard it. She took a single stomp closer to Vegeta, and the prince's foot moved back an inch. I've heard your whole spiel, Vegeta. The pride, the prejudice, the taunts, the gloats. She took another step, but then the music changed. Uncertainty, pain, frustration, and finally, with one more step, she stretched herself up to loom over him, her eyes shining like merciless lighting in a storm. The fear, she growled. The way you begged for your life, the way you whimpered for Nappa to save you, the way you practically wet yourself as I stood over your crushed and broken body and ripped your tail right off of you. The prince trembled as she glared down at him. I only needed to reach out and squeeze to make you dead, but I decided not to. Do you know why, Vegeta? Vegeta opened his mouth but only a little squeak came out. Answer me, you little bitch. Puddin roared. Vegeta quailed and opened his mouth to blurt out something. But then he froze. Puddin blinked and edged her head. Vegeta, she asked. Vegeta, settling her body down to her normal height, she waved her hand in front of the Echo's face. Nothing. You know, Puddin, said a voice from behind her, it still counts as damaging time patrol property even when that damage is emotional. Puddin swallowed. In hindsight, she should have known this moment would come sooner or later. That didn't mean she actually felt ready for it, though. But regardless, she remembered what her daddy had said and squared her shoulders, raising up a wall of pure take no shit. Whatever was said, Puddin couldn't let herself be moved. After one more bracing breath, she turned around. Standing just inside a newly created time gate, Master Punosa had one hand on her hip and held a remote in the other. Puddin crossed her arms and shifted her weight to her back leg, adopting a nonchalant pose. Hey, Punosa, Puddin said, trying to sound casual. What's up? The Majin's eyes narrowed. For starters, how about you put a master on my name? You don't have enough seniority yet to drop it. Puddin shrugged dismissively. That only served to make Punosa's eyes colder. And furthermore, Punosa continued, what the hell is going on with you? Me? Puddin asked, checking her nails despite her gloves. I'm doing just fine. No problems here. Really. 'Cause I've already had some problems today. First, I just got finished dealing with a complaint in the time nest. A few time patrollers rented out this training area for an hour only to find that you had taken it over without filling out the right forms. Puddin rolled her eyes and said, well, excuse me if I had to show those losers who was boss. Punosa's eyebrows raised incredulously. They politely asked you to leave and then you bit one of them. Like I said, had to show them who was boss. Punosa made a disgusted scoff and shook her head. And as if that weren't enough, you've been absent from the last 5 sessions of your remedial training. I've been trying to contact you for days. I left 10 messages. 9 messages, actually, Puddin murmured. Punosa's mouth thinned. Puddin winced. Oops. That's what I thought, said Punosa, striding forward a few steps before she stood before Puddin. Punosa crossed her arms and glared down at the girl. Puddin held her posture and tried to act like she wasn't intimidated. Young lady, Punosa began, you seem to greatly underestimate the kind of thin ice you're standing on. I don't know what's gotten into you for the past 2 weeks, but it's starting to try my patience. I don't remember asking your opinion, Puddin shot back. Punosa's eyes flashed dangerously. You didn't, but I'm telling you anyway. You've spent 2 weeks strutting around Content City like you own the place, acting rude and dismissive to other time patrollers and showing no care for the rules of this organization. Punos's glare seemed to become even harsher, so much so that Puddin felt a tremor in her stomach. This includes failing to take your remedial lessons, Punosa added, which are actually quite vital to ensuring you even remain a part of the time patrol. Puddin swallowed and tried to look confident. There's no way the time patrol would do anything like that, she said, wincing internally as she stammered. They're too scared of me to even think of kicking me out. You need me. For a moment, Punosa only blinked silently at her. Puddin tried to draw herself up, but she quailed. It was almost like Punosa's silver-on-black eyes could stare directly through her. Puddin could see the woman's emotions through those eyes. Confusion, contemplation, realization, and then finally, as her mouth curved into a scowl, anger. Dumplin', Punosa said at last. I should have known he'd be the reason for this. What ideas has he been filling your head with? That the key to power is a big ego and a bigger mouth. Don't you talk about my daddy like that. Puddin stuttered, stamping her foot in frustration while she tried to act with imaginary confidence. He says that me and him are the strongest people here. That you need us. And that we don't take any punishments because this whole place would fall apart without us. By this point, Puddin was panting, feeling the righteous fury of needing to defend her family name. She expected the other woman to respond with some angry retort. However, the woman's eyes were devoid of any noticeable emotion. Puddin, she said with a shake of her head, I like your father. He's good to have in a fight and he's a great drinking buddy. But even still, she hesitated, glancing at the ground before looking back at Puddin. I don't think your dad should be your main role model. He thinks he can do anything he wants because he's strong, but sooner or later that ego of his is going to get him in the kind of trouble he can't blast his way out of. I know you're a good kid, Puddin, and that you're gonna go far, but I just always hoped you'd end up a better person than him. Puddin felt a fire burst in her stomach. Shut up, she yelled at Punosa. You don't know anything. There's no such thing as being better than my daddy. You're just jealous. Puddin glared at Punosa, her eyes blazing. Punosa's eyes, on the other hand, seemed to shine with something like pity. If that is what you want to believe, she said quietly. With that, she turned and slowly walked away. Puddin just stood there, her stomach buzzing and her fingers clenched into fists. She was angry. She was insulted. She was sad that one of her favorite people in the world had looked at her like that. Several hours later, Punosa stood in front of Liran's place, trying to gather up the nerve to walk inside. She stared hard at the front door, almost as if she were committing every crack, grain, and fleck of paint to memory. She shifted uncomfortably, scuffing the toe of her sandal through the desert sand. She knew what she needed to do. She knew she needed to open the door, talk to him, and hope that he could agree with her. They were still friends, surely. Well, perhaps just enough friends that he would hear her out. He might hear her out. She sighed. Punosa didn't want this to turn into a fight. Certainly not helping anybody by standing out here, she muttered. Finally, she strode forward and opened the door. As she stood there in the entryway, Punosa couldn't stop herself from thinking about the last time she had been in this bar. The paltry Christmas lights had long since been removed and the jukebox was playing rock and roll instead of jazzy Christmas tunes. A few other people were now nursing their own drinks, not to mention the exact same Namekian bartender standing behind the bar. He could be polishing the very same glass from that Christmas night, for all she knew. Dumplin had claimed his favorite stool at the bar. No one sat near him. No one stood near him. No one seemed to look or even breathe in his direction. Punosa didn't blame them. She could feel the anger rolling off him like waves of sheer around and find out. A tall glass of beer was clutched in his hands and he took a sip from it. He's hitting the beer instead of the liquor. That's at least a little promising. Punosa crossed the room and took a seat at the bar next to Dumplin, signaling to the bartender for a drink. Dumplin shot her a look before turning his attention back to his glass. What do you want, Punosa? He said, annoyed that his isolation had been broken. I wanted to check up on you, she said, trying to keep her tone light and neutral. I heard you just got back from a mission. You've been gone for almost a week. And all to show for it, he said, draining the last of his glass and thumping it twice on the bar top. The bartender slid 2 glasses of beer down the bar, almost like he was unwilling to get closer. Punosa took only a sip while Dumplin sucked down a big gulp. I heard you were tracking, her, Punosa said, skipping over the name. You mean Tawa? Dumplin growled at the bar top. Yeah, for all the good it did us. She always knows we're coming and, whenever she is, she's gone by the time we get there. He grunted into his drinks. I bet it's some up by Trunks. Dumplin settled into silence, so Punosa took in a quiet breath, now ready to get started. How's Puddin' doing? Dumplin tensed up and gave Punosa a side eye. She's fine, he said. Better than fine. She's great. I see, Punosa said, still trying to keep her answers neutral. Well, I can't help but think that all of this stuff with Tawa must be hard for her. Hard for both of you. Dumplin made a noncommittal grunt, but he didn't tell her off, so Punosa took that as leave to keep going. And seeing as you'll be on long-term missions for as long as Tawa is out there in the wild, maybe it would be good for Puddin to find someone to talk to about it. Dumplin's glass froze on its way to his lips and he slowly turned to look at her. She talks plenty, he said, his voice low. I mean, Punosa said, that this could be a very stressful time for her, considering the pressure of her missions and the fact that Tawa is causing mayhem out there. I feel it might be better for her, and for you as well, if she had somewhere else to stay while this crisis is going on. Oh, let me take a wild guess where you think she should stay, Dumplin said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Punosa met his gaze. If she stayed with me, she'd be with someone she trusted. She wouldn't have to live in that empty house when you're away on missions, and you can stop by to visit. I'm just gonna stop you right there, Dumplin said, holding up a finger. He was seething now. Whatever stress or pressure you think Puddin is under does not matter. She's just fine. Dumplin, Punosa said slowly, trying to keep the agitation out of her voice. Puddin is not your problem, Dumplin snapped, slamming his glass on the bar top. Everyone in the bar went still. Punosa closed her eyes and took a breath. She really didn't want this to turn into a fight. Dumplin, she said slowly. I'm only saying this because I care about her. I want her to be happy and healthy. I know you think your way of parenting is the best way, but she needs. The only thing she needs is a crash course in being a demon god, he interrupted. She spent all that time learning all your shitty patrol lessons, and what did that get her? Nothing. I'm trying to teach her how to do this job the right way and undo everything you ed up with her. Me, said Punosa,